Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, joined, as always, by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. Nate, the NFL draft is wrapped. Landing spots and draft capital are locked in. It was a hell of a weekend. How are you feeling coming out of the excitement that was the NFL draft?
Feeling good. Always a little bit tired after the draft, but it was a lot of fun. This being the first time where I'm full time on the content side, was able to prepare for the draft a lot more than I have been in at least a decade or so. So it was fun knowing so much about the players going into it, and then seeing all of the destinations. A lot of good destinations there. So I think it's going to be a fun season. Definitely fun following a lot of these rookies throughout the year.
Yeah, it's always a fun time of year. A lot of optimism around some of the rookies coming in and stuff, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. We're going to talk about winners, but we're also going to focus on some of the losers as well, or risers and fallers, however you want to phrase it. Coming out of the draft, we're going to look at kind of rookies and veterans whose stock went up or down depending on what their respective teams did during the draft. So I'm looking forward to breaking it all down here with you, Nate, and for these guys, for everybody tuning in as well. So there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to get into it here shortly. But first, I want to let you know that if you love fantasy football, which of course you do, you love winning your leagues, then listen up, because right now you can get 25% off an annual PFF Plus subscription. You'll get full access to the 2025 NFL Draft Guide. You'll also, if you subscribe right now, you'll get access to the 2026 NFL Draft Guide on an annual subscription that'll be out around this time next year or a few weeks earlier. And then you'll get detailed reports on hundreds of prospects, complete with scheme fits and player comps to help you prep for your drafts. And then beyond the draft guide, obviously PFF Plus includes advanced tools and insights trusted by all 32 teams, perfect for building and managing winning fantasy rosters. So head to subscribe.pff.com and use the code DRAFT25 to get 25% off. Again, that's subscribe.pff.com, code DRAFT25. You will thank me after your championship run. All right, Nate. First things first, before we even get into the winners and losers, we have to talk about Travis Hunter being drafted second overall by the Jacksonville Jaguars, who make the move with the Cleveland Browns to get him. I personally love this for Hunter. I think you're maybe less excited about it. So tell us about what your thoughts are on Hunter now that he is officially a member of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Sure. So as we got closer and closer to the start of the draft, I was becoming more and more comfortable with Hunter being higher up on my dynasty rankings because I was becoming more confident he'd end up with the Cleveland Browns. And the Browns were very adamant that they would view him as a wide receiver first. And they are arguably the team heading into the draft that had the biggest need at wide receiver. And now after the draft, they are definitely the team with the biggest need at wide receiver because they didn't address the position during the draft. They got Jerry Jeudy as the clear number one receiver, Cedric Tillman as the clear number two, and then it's David Bell, Jamari Thrash, Michael Woods the second, and DeAndre Carter. One of those is going to be the third wide receiver for Cleveland this year, unless they add a free agent at some point. So they were saying, their general manager, Andrew Berry, was saying that they view him as a wide receiver first, and the clear need is at wide receiver. So I thought if he went to Cleveland, he would be able to play there full time without issue. Maybe he would be playing some on defense as well, but because the need was so clear at wide receiver, I thought there would be a chance he'd not only be on the field a lot, but have a chance to be the number one wide receiver on Cleveland. I could easily see him overtaking Jerry Jeudy as the top target earner. And even though the offense wasn't going to be all that great, the quarterback situation is a mess, he would still be the one seeing the clear majority of targets on the team, where now he's with Jacksonville. The wide receiver depth chart is a little bit stronger. They have Brian Thomas Jr., who's a clear number one receiver, Diami Brown, Parker Washington, Gabe Davis, all players who are probably more number three receivers. Travis Hunter should be the number two in that offense with those guys fighting for the third spot. But I think in Jacksonville, things can be a little bit more fluid. Anytime I saw a post about it from like an aggregator account or one that like just posted an image with a couple words, it was talking about how they want to put him at wide receiver first. But I think how I interpreted it after listening to the press conference with Hunter, it sounded like they know he's more experienced on defense and is already stronger at defense. So they want to get him more of that work on offense, but they want to play him on both sides of the field. They talked about needing they have a plan, but they need to be fluid during training camp. How if he has more work on one side of the ball, just for whatever reason, on one day, they might need to adapt and get him more time on the other side of the ball the other day. And it's always been the kind of conventional wisdom that it's easier to play on defense and then have a package roll on offense compared to the other way around. And I think this Jacksonville wide receiver group, they have enough versatility in the positions that they can play. Some of these guys can play in the slot or out wide. Some of them can play the Z or the X. We saw Parker Washington basically play every position last year, just depending on who was healthy. So I think they can have a situation where he's playing a lot on defense and then he's maybe only playing 70 to 75% on offense because they're rotating through a bunch of these guys and putting them in different positions and allowing that to work. We saw in Liam Cohen's offense last year with the Buccaneers. Typically, when Chris Godwin was healthy, he was seeing a ton of snaps. Mike Evans, when he was at his healthiest, was playing a lot of snaps, but they were just fine rotating a bunch of players in. They at times had a 6-man rotation at wide receiver, even though there were clear top wide receivers, clear backup receivers. It's still a point where he might not see enough snaps or enough targets with Brian Thomas as the number one receiver, where it could be a problem that we might not be comfortable starting him in fantasy if he's not getting enough routes or enough targets.
I hear you. Yeah, no, I get it. I definitely think that the concern is, it's valid. For me personally, like I love the spot for Travis Hunter, like especially, starting with like the quarterback upgrade for sure. Like it was either Joe Flacco or maybe like Russell Wilson. And then it became Trevor Lawrence. So that did like at least provide an upgrade in the quarterback situation for him. And then you have Liam Cohen operating this offense, which they have, they've come out to say that Hunter will play wide receiver first. And to me, that means that like if he's gonna lose snaps anywhere, if he can't handle the workload on both sides of the ball, I think that'll be on defense first. But you take into consideration too, like the Jaguars gave up a second for him and a future first in order to get him, stating that they believe that he is like a first round wide receiver and a first round cornerback as well. Like so they know he's this kind of unique weapon of which the league has really never seen before, right? So I would be shocked like if they don't kind of maximize his potential and make sure that he's getting the ball in his hands as often as possible on the offensive side. So like even if it is like a 75% route share, like I think his target rate on that route share should still be elite. Like I think Brian Thomas Jr. can still eat as well. Like I think there will be more design touches for Travis Hunter than probably even Brian Thomas Jr. if I were to assume. And again, it's not to say that Brian Thomas Jr. won't continue to be great, but I think injecting Hunter into this offense kind of creates some at least like force feeding of the ball into his hands so that he can kind of work as the star that they drafted him to be and that they believe that he is, taking him second overall. So I did come away like really liking the spot for him, just better offense, better quarterback, just better vibes all around, compared to what the Browns are and have been. So he's 102 for me, like by a pretty decent margin. I think I really like this spot for him, especially if you're in a league where you're getting defensive points for offensive players. Like that is a massive advantage for the position. So I'm still really excited about Travis Hunter, but I definitely get that not everybody is going to feel super comfortable in taking him. I've seen a lot of kind of polarizing opinions on what he might be for this offense. So I get it 100% for sure.
I think I settled on the 105 for him. And like you said, you have to check your scoring system. If you do get points for what he does on the defensive side of the ball, that is a very different thing that definitely boosts him up the rankings. And you certainly have to account for that. One other thing that I thought was interesting, trying to think of how Jacksonville's offense will look, is I view him as an X or a Z receiver. I think he'll play on the outside. That's where he played in college. And Liam Cohen's offenses have focused a ton on slot receivers. We saw it with Cooper Kupp with the Rams. We saw it with Chris Godwin last year. And before they drafted Hunter, they talked about Thomas's ability to move around, his ability to play in the slot. So I could also see it something where Thomas is playing in the slot a lot and Hunter might stay on the outside. And because he's learning both offense and defense, it might not make sense for them to teach him both the outside roles and the slot roles. So that was also something where I thought Thomas, I'm not too concerned about Thomas's target share because the two can coexist. Both of them can get over 20% target rates, and that worked just fine. But I could still see Thomas being the clear number one wide receiver in the offense because he's the one who I think will be playing in the slot, which is how this offense has worked in the past. So that is also something that came to mind is like Hunter, because he's learning two positions on offense and defense, might not at least initially learn the slot as much because Thomas can play there, Parker Washington can play there. So that was also something that played into things with me not being quite as high as Hunter, but also like this is so much better than going to a team like the Giants where he could have been a cornerback first and a wide receiver second. So even though I'm not considering Hunter a winner here, this is definitely a lot better than what it could have been on a number of other teams.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, again, knowing your scoring system is huge too. And like even on like for Sleeper, for example, like they're giving him a dual designation where he could play wide receiver and defensive back in your starting roster. So for those IDP leagues, like I know there's a lot of people that are in consideration for him as even the 101 in rookie drafts because they could put a wide receiver into their defensive back position, which is just an unreal cheat code that we've never seen before. So there's so much with Travis Hunter, and I honestly probably the player that I'm looking forward to the most this season to see how it all plays out. So yeah, excited about that. But let's get into our winners and losers now, Nate. Starting with the winners, players that you've highlighted as those who probably saw the greatest stock increase coming out of the NFL draft. And we'll start right away with RJ Harvey going to the Denver Broncos at 60th overall. So late second round, Nate, does Sean Payton finally have his running back of the future here?
I certainly hope so, or at least one of them. But Harvey is someone who throughout his college career was playing well as a receiver. He was also great as a runner his last 2 years, but even starting out when he was more of a part-time player, was doing a little bit more work on the receiving side of things. His numbers as a receiver compared to other college running backs look strong, and the Broncos are the team that, even though they've been pretty much a complete mess at running back these past 2 years in Sean Payton's offense, they still have the most receptions by running backs over these past 2 seasons. So I could see Harvey getting a ton of targets. I think he projects to at least be the third down back for Denver. And it kind of reminds me of when they drafted Alvin Kamara. It was right around that same time. It was an early third round pick rather than a late second. They had Mark Ingram on the team. Ingram was still the lead early down back. Kamara only played 45% of snaps as a rookie, but he was still finished fourth in terms of fantasy points per game because he caught 80 something passes, only ran the ball 120 times, but that was enough. And I think something that was also exciting about Denver is Sean Payton's never really had that like clear goal line back. He's typically just stuck with his running backs. Looking last year at Denver, like Audric Estime should be the goal line runner based on the size of the running backs, but he only had one snap at 1 yard to go. It was just the same. A lot of Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin's an even smaller running back than Harvey, and he was still seeing snaps at the 1 yard line. So I'm not discounting the idea that Harvey could be getting snaps at the goal line. And in terms of early down, like I wouldn't be surprised if it's still a 3-man rotation of sometimes it's Harvey playing on early down, sometimes it's the other guys. But if he's taking some of those early down snaps, taking the third down snaps, we've seen that time and time again for Sean Payton's offense lead to a lot of fantasy success. And that's from someone like Harvey, who I didn't write a pre-draft profile for. We weren't talking about him much when we were doing running back rankings because he was just a little bit lower than that top 10 or so consensus guys. So him getting drafted a bunch of guys that we liked, going to this excellent landing spot. That's one of the nice things about the draft is we had a couple of these players go to these landing spots that made a ton of sense, and Harvey's one of them in this Denver offense.
Yeah, no, this is I couldn't agree more. He is one of the biggest winners in this draft. He was like when we were doing this pre-draft, he was a projected day 3 pick. He was going in consensus mock drafts just outside the top 100. Now he's looking like a lock for the first round of fantasy drafts. I liked Harvey in the pre-draft process. I wrote him up as a sleeper because of his like likely day 3 capital, but he couldn't be any less of a sleeper now going round 2 to an optimal situation in Denver. Like, yeah, he's an older running back at 24 years old, but but luckily he was able to post like dominant numbers in college that we'd expect from a slightly older prospect. And 95th percentile explosive run rate, 89th percentile missed tackles forced per attempt, 91st percentile in career rushing grade, and then like you mentioned, even the 76th percentile in yards per route run. So he has this receiving upside to him. So there's the potential there to contribute on early downs, passing downs in Denver, which is what we were kind of hoping for from the Denver Broncos in this year's draft. So I think he's kind of in that like 109 to 111 range for me in rookie drafts right now. I'm not sure about you, Nate. I think probably similar if I had to guess, but the opportunity, like it's great, right? He's actually a decent running back to bet on with that opportunity because that doesn't always happen. Like with the Cowboys this year, for example. So at least Harvey has the combination of draft capital, opportunity, and encouraging data to bet on here, which I really like.
Yeah, I'll add we aren't really focusing specifically on dynasty or redraft with these. These are just winners,
Right.
losers. With Harvey in general, I like him better in redraft than I do in dynasty. You
Mm-hmm.
hit the spot exactly where I have him in my dynasty rankings, but I don't think this stops the Broncos from drafting more of an early down back next year to go along with Harvey or something like that. And like you mentioned, the age, he's a little bit older for a running back, but in terms of redraft, like I think he can definitely be a fantasy starter this year. That's well within the realm of possibility. Have him potentially above other running backs who are drafted even in the second round of the
Mm-hmm.
draft. So I think redraft, I'm really excited about him. Dynasty, maybe a little bit less so, but still, he made his way into the late first round where he definitely was not there a week ago.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, if we could squeeze, 1, maybe 2 years out of him, anything after that is a bonus. Like I wouldn't be surprised if, like you said, they address the position again in the next season or two. But for this year, for sure, it's a big spot for a big win for RJ Harvey. Okay, next winner on the list, Nate. I for one am shocked that the Bears didn't spend any meaningful capital on a running back. They did draft Kyle Monongai in the seventh round out of Rutgers, but that's not nearly enough to consider DeAndre Swift anything but a winner at this point, is it?
Yeah, I had so many posts on social media of like, here are my rookie rankings. It's one, Ashton Genty, two, whoever the Bears drafted. Even on day two of the draft, I'm like, the biggest winner is whoever the Bears draft at running back. And that just kept on not happening. So right now, the running back depth chart for Chicago is DeAndre Swift, Roshan Johnson, and Travis Homer. They did so much to address the offensive line this offseason. Added Joe Thuney, Drew Dahlman, Jonah Jackson, added a tackle in the second round. So the offensive line is in a very good spot. So whoever is going to be getting the carries in Chicago is going to have a decent amount of fantasy relevancy. I ended up moving Swift up my rankings a pretty good amount. Roshan Johnson also moved up since I don't really know how they're going to use the two backs, how the snaps will get distributed. It won't necessarily be the same as it was last year. It won't necessarily be the same as what we've seen in this kind of offense before. I do think even like Dallas was another team that we thought would draft a running back earlier. They did draft one, I think it was fifth round, but there's still like J.K. Dobbins is available. He's probably going to sign with some team at some point. Chicago could be one of those teams. I could also see a couple of running backs potentially being available via trade. Like a Devin Singletary comes to mind. Um, Jamal Williams is another running back I could see going there just because he's played with Ben Johnson before and had his best season under Ben Johnson, and he hasn't signed anywhere. So Swift is definitely a winner now. I would not be at all surprised if Chicago still finds a way to address the running back position at some point of time. But even then, any veteran that they bring in still probably isn't going to be of the same caliber player as any of these top rookies in this draft.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it, right? Like I know Nick Chubb's still floating around there, but obviously we saw after the injury last season, not the same player, and who knows what he'll look like this year. But yeah, it's frustrating, right? Like they could have gone with almost anyone in round two. Like I know TreVeyon Henderson, I think was selected one pick before them in the second round, but there were options considering they still had like I think 3 second round picks. There was Caleb Johnson, RJ Harvey, DJ Giddens, Cam Scatterbo, Bishal Tootin, Dylan Sampson, like a lot of those guys who were projected to go in that range from round 2 to 4, they were there, but they just never went that way. So, they spent the fourth round pick even on like a special teams linebacker. So that alone should tell you like their level of confidence in their current plan at running back, specifically DeAndre Swift. Yeah, just a massive winner here for sure. So we'll see how the rest of the offseason shakes out, but definitely nice for DeAndre Swift's value. All right, another winner from this year's draft, Nate. Back to some of the rookies who were drafted. Tetairoa McMillan goes 8th overall to the Carolina Panthers. Carolina were heavy favorites to draft Jalen Walker for their defense, but they do the right thing here, in my opinion, and go with T-Mac out of Arizona, giving them and Bryce Young a much needed true wide receiver one.
Oh, yeah, the wide receivers, they were interesting heading into the draft because there were a couple of teams like Carolina where there was no wide receiver among their projected starting lineup where you're like, this guy needs to be benched. This guy should be a wide receiver 4. But Carolina still needed a clear number 1 wide receiver. The Packers were another team like that. And then there were plenty of teams where you look at the third guy on the depth chart and think, yeah, that guy should be 4th on the depth chart. But that doesn't necessarily make that a good landing spot because they could have 2 other good wide receivers. But I think Carolina being able to get T-Mac, this was a great landing spot for him. One, the fact that he was drafted in and as a top 10 pick, which we weren't positive was going to happen before. So that was one nice thing. But then thinking more and more about how he fits into this offense, I became more and more excited about him. Thinking about how Carolina didn't really have a true X receiver last year. They started with David Moore as their X receiver. Then halfway through the season, they started to shift to Xavier Legette as the X receiver, and that was mostly to try getting their best 3 wide receivers on the field once Adam Thielen was going to be healthy again. But that didn't really work out for Legette, so I think T-Mac fits right into the X receiver spot, which will be great for him. He'll get plenty of playing time. But then thinking about Dave Canales and how he's dealt with X receivers in the past. In 2020 and 2021, he was Seattle's offensive coordinator, where DK Metcalf was the X receiver. Both seasons, he had double-digit touchdowns, set a career high in receiving yards in 2020. And then his 1 year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2023. Mike Evans sure had a great history before and after Canales was there, but he scored 13 touchdowns that year and had his most receiving yards since 2018. So even though these are very talented X receivers and Dave Canales didn't make them talented receivers, he used them more than other coaches had used those players. So I think a double-digit touchdown season is within the realm of possibility if T-Mac lives up to the hype with how much he's liked using X receivers, particularly in touchdown situations. So that also is a really big boost to his value. And Bryce Young, someone who played better late in the season, looked like one of the better quarterbacks. So if he can continue building on that momentum, that would be huge for this offense.
Yeah, I love this. I like Jalen Coker as much as the next guy. I haven't really been, a believer in Xavier Legette or any of their other past draft decisions recently at wide receiver. And while they still have Adam Thielen, like you said, I think he's pushing 60 at this point in his career. So if Bryce Young really is their QB of the future, which he's really started to kind of prove last season in the second half of the year, this could be an ideal pairing to work with on this offense. And like you said, with Dave Canales running the offense there as well, like McMillan, I think, can stay locked in as that kind of big outside wide receiver who can make plays downfield. He had an 87th percentile explosive play rate for his college career. He was great against single coverage. He had like a 97th percentile receiving grade versus single coverage for his career. So he'll get a lot of opportunities to show that he's a number 1 wide receiver. I liked like the potential Dallas Cowboys landing spot, but I think this is just as good for McMillan because even if the offense might not be maybe as good, I don't think it's impossible for them to get there, especially with Bryce Young's development. And he gets to be like their kind of clear number 1 instead of a likely number 2 next to CeeDee Lamb. So that definitely helps. And yeah, I agree. I think McMillan is a big winner in this year's draft for sure.
I'd add if things weren't bad enough for Jalen Coker, they went and added Hunter Renfrow last night
Oh
as
God,
another slot
I know.
receiver for them. So that makes now that seem like a 3 players rotating in 2 spots. Now it might be 4 players if Hunter Renfrow can get back to the same player he was a couple years ago.
True. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, like it definitely for McMillan, but yeah, everybody else on Carolina should definitely be concerned here. But, okay, a few more wide receivers worth covering here, Nate. We talked a lot pre-draft about how there were fewer prime landing spots for wide receiver than there were kind of compared to running backs. But I think it really helped that the wide receivers that, the few spots that were available, they kind of got filled by those wide receivers and with high draft capital players as well. Starting with, I think the first wide receiver taken in the second round, Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, going to the Houston Texans. So I really like this spot for Higgins. Like I had mentioned him a couple of times pre-draft, and actually I mentioned about the Texans maybe adding another wide receiver, potentially like a Luther Burden, but Higgins might be a better fit here considering the need for like another outside option other than Nico Collins. Like as far as day two wide receivers go, he was kind of like the ideal archetype, him and another wide receiver who we'll talk about in just a sec, like to kind of come in and be a consistent outside threat for a good passing offense. Like he's proven to be great against single coverage. He ranked 86th percentile in yards per route run versus single coverage for his career, 98th percentile receiving grade versus single coverage, 93rd percentile receiving grade lined up wide, where he spent 83% of his snaps in college. Was also 95th percentile receiving grade versus press coverage. Like super productive during his time at Iowa State, which I think is really encouraging since they weren't like this highly graded passing offense, at least in 2024, because they kind of dropped off a bit in 2024 from the 2023 season. But Higgins still dominated. He was an 1,100 yard wide receiver. He led the team in yards per route run at 2.66. So I'm a big fan of his. I like the fit. I think he can be a consistent, wide receiver two for the Houston Texans. Probably more of a wide receiver three. Like I think what we're hoping for fantasy purposes. That yeah, I really like him. I think personally he's gonna be inside the top five for me as far as rookie wide receivers go. I just like him as a player more, and I could be optimistic about him in this Houston Texans offense, especially if CJ Stroud kind of bounces back from his down year in year two, which I think is definitely possible as well.
There. I'm very curious how he's going to fit into this offense since I feel like one of the players Higgins was most similar to was Nico Collins. So, how is a team going to deploy two players who
Yeah.
are basically like Nico Collins? It reminds me of kind of the Steelers getting DK Metcalf, and it's like, okay, now you have two X receivers. How are you going to deploy both of them? So, I tried to look at like times where teams have tried to do it and looking at teams with wide receivers 6'4" or taller, kind of as a substitute for X receiver. And we have seen 5 times over the past decade where two wide receivers at 6'4" or taller were able to get at least 500 yards with the same team. They were Buccaneers in 2015, Mike Evans and Vincent Jackson. 2018 Chargers with Mike Williams and Tyrell Williams. 2020 Bengals with T. Higgins and A.J. Brown. 2021 Broncos with Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick. And 2022 Packers with Christian Watson and Alan Lazard. And even though I put 500 yards as the threshold, we never really saw two of those wide receivers be fantasy relevant at the same time. So I'm really curious how that's going to work. They also added the new offensive coordinator this past year from the Rams, and the Rams, if anything, highlight their slot receivers. So having two 6'4" receivers doesn't really fit that way. So like I'm very curious to see how this offense works out. They did add Jalen Noel in the third round as well, and he's going to be more of an inside guy to go along with Christian Kirk. So we will see some rotating at wide receiver, but even though I don't know exactly how this offense will work out or those kind of things, the fact that Higgins was drafted 34th overall is a lot higher than we expected. Clearly, Houston has a plan for him if they drafted him with that selection. So even though I don't see it, the Texans do have a plan, and this is probably better than a lot of other situations where Higgins could have been in.
Yeah, that's fair. And yeah, that was definitely a part of it for me too, right? Like he was projected around like that 50-ish range in most mock drafts, but yeah, very, very early on in round two. Plus, I do have faith that the Texans passing offense can get back to being a more above average at the very least. Passing offense. And yeah, if it is like a T Higgins, Jamar Chase light situation, obviously that's the most ideal. I don't think obviously Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins qualify as that level of talent, although that's no disrespect to Nico Collins or anything like that. But I'm definitely optimistic as far as capital and the potential there for him to get targets in that offense. But we'll see how it shakes out here. And there is another outside wide receiver who was drafted in round two, Nate, that I felt pretty optimistic about. Ideal situation, I think, for his skill set specifically, and that was Trey Harris out of Ole Miss joining the Los Angeles Chargers, giving Justin Herbert kind of the clear outside wide receiver that they really lacked last season, in my opinion. So this was another spot that I really liked for Trey Harris. How did you feel about this one?
The more you were the one that suggested this, but the more I looked into it, the more I started to like it as a field stretching wide receiver for the Chargers. Looking at him in our draft guide, they focused on he doesn't have this huge route tree, but he is this deep threat wide receiver. And last year, the Chargers, they had multiple players with a decent amount of deep yards, but Joshua Palmer was their main deep threat last year, and Palmer is no longer on the roster, so I think Harris can pretty well fill that spot. Justin Herbert had the second most deep passing yards last year, even though it wasn't like a clear deep target. So I think he can throw to Harris deep a decent amount. And then the only thing is like some of the player comps was player comp to Alec Pierce, and I expect him to be a high average depth of target guy, and other high average depth of target guys aren't always the best for fantasy, but this is still a much better landing spot than Harris could have landed on for a number of other teams.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was thinking about, that Ole Miss offense there under Lane Kiffin when I was looking at kind of ideal landing spots that, teams that might be similar. And like you said, Justin Herbert did have, obviously he has the arm strength. We know that much about him, and he would take those shots deep and just didn't really have the player capable of kind of benefiting the most from those types of throws. So I think Trey Harris is somebody that can step in. I mean, this man led the nation in yards per route run last year with a ridiculous 5.12 mark, albeit in just 8 games, but he still put up over 1,000 yards in those 8 games total. So part of that was due to the Lane Kiffin offense just chucking it deep every chance they got, which was naturally going to help Harris. But to his credit, he still made the most of those opportunities, and the Chargers believed in him as a round two pick to pair with Justin Herbert. There's, I think, a lot to like about Harris's fit here, considering they just don't have that reliable option outside of Ladd McConkey. Like, I know they brought back Mike Williams, but he's been anything but reliable. Quentin Johnston has not been the first round pick that they hoped he could be. Harris has a lot of potential to I think, emerge as a favorite target, probably after Ladd McConkey in this offense. So I'm definitely hopeful. I like Harris on the Chargers enough to have him as my wide receiver 5 right now, ahead of like a Matthew Golden, Luther Burden, Jack Besh. But I know not everybody's going to agree with that one. I just like the player a lot more, and the fit.
I'll add with Harris, I think he's someone that I'm going to like better in best ball and like better in
Mm.
DFS than I will end up liking in redraft leagues. So even if I don't have him that high in my redraft rankings, he is still someone to consider, especially in best ball or any given week in DFS. If he makes one or two of those deep catches, then he has a huge
Right.
week.
For sure. So we got some like quick hitters or honorable mentions here for winners as well. Nate, you've put together a list. Not sure if you want to talk about each one individual. Maybe I'll just run through the list, and you pick out the guys that you want to give a little bit more discussion on. Totally up to you.
I'll run through them. Like Ashton
Sure.
Genty landing on a team where he's going to have a ton of snaps. We'll talk about him more later this week. Cameron Scadaboo ending up with the Giants. We'll talk about him a little bit more later. Matthew Golden, kind of similar to T-Mac, where he ends up with a team that needs a number one wide receiver. I'm less confident that Golden can fill the shoes of a number one receiver, but the opportunity is at least there, where it might not have been there for most other teams he could have landed on. Jack Beck, another second round wide receiver, opportunity for plenty of playing time and targets with the Raiders. Tyler Shaw, I don't remember how to pronounce his last name, but with the Saints, has a chance to be a starter, where I definitely viewed him as a backup, and he has some rushing potential. So if Derek Carr does miss significant time, he could be the starter. He could have fantasy value if his rushing is good enough. And then Mason Taylor, a guy that we've talked about before, where we weren't totally high on him, but he ends up with the New York Jets, where he has the opportunity to be a starter, where a lot of the tight ends that were drafted very closely after him will at least start their NFL careers as backups.
Yeah, those are good calls. Yeah, we'll talk more like in depth about some of these players as the days go on here coming out of the draft. And I was thinking about like other like non rookies too, like Darnell Mooney for Atlanta, for example. Like they could have drafted a second wide receiver. He seems pretty safe. Jerry Judy, I mean, you mentioned it. Jalen Tolbert in Dallas potentially, maybe even Demario Douglas or Jalen Polk in New England, right? Like they were considered a favorite to draft somebody, maybe one of those slot guys like a Luther Burden or Emeka Egbuka, and they ended up going with an outside wide receiver like a Kyle Williams. So maybe those guys can be considered as well. But yeah, a lot of guys that kind of have that we kind of have to sort out here coming out of the draft. But we'll definitely get into more detailed discussion about these players as the weeks go on. Before we go on to the losers, though, I do want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. The new year is a great time to reevaluate financial goals, not just for yourself, but for your kids. Fabric by Gerber Life gives you the perfect time to make sure that your kids are on a path toward a solid financial future. A kid's investment account from Fabric is quick and simple to set up and lets you invest in their future now for education, big milestones, and more. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy and to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kid's investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids can invest when they're minors, but a kid's investment account allows you to invest on their behalf now, giving their investments more time to grow. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Then you can manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Funds can be used for nearly anything, benefiting your child from tuition and tutors to music classes. And when they're adults and out on their own, they can use the funds for anything they need. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy, MEET fabric.com/fantasy. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Okay, let's move on to some players who potentially lost stock coming out of this year's draft, because it can't all be positive, Nate. So the first loser that we have is naturally going to be Najee Harris of the Los Angeles Chargers after the team spent a first round pick on Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. What were your thoughts on this pick?
Yeah, look, this is a pretty straightforward. They drafted a first round running back, so that's pretty detrimental to Harris. Like last year, we saw J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards as the two running backs. I could see Najee Harris kind of filling that Gus Edwards role of taking some of those early down snaps here and there, but Omarion Hampton getting basically everything else. And then Harris, like, he only signed a 1 year, $5 million contract. So, yeah, that's better than plenty of other running backs. He's probably going to have at least somewhat of a role still, but he got less guaranteed money than Antonio Gibson, Devin Singletary did a year ago. And those are two running backs who just lost value for the guys that we'll be talking about shortly after this as well. So, Harris, like, right now, I basically view him as a handcuff. I don't think he is someone that you can start when both running backs are healthy. Maybe a chance that because Najee Harris is the veteran and Hampton's the rookie, that they favor Harris a little bit early on in the season. I think that's at least possible, but in terms of where I'm going to be drafting these guys, Harris basically just a handcuff for the Chargers.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think like the most optimistic outlook for Harris is that him and Hampton are kind of redundant and can be used interchangeably, but I don't think that's what we're getting here. I fully expect Hampton to kind of lead this backfield in touches, not just this year, but the extent of his rookie contract. Because yeah, Najee is on, like you said, just a 1 year deal, so they're not invested in him, and that they're going to make him the lead back over their first round pick. So I'm not concerned about Najee cutting into Hampton's share too much, especially long term. Um, all right, another running back that almost escaped the draft unscathed coming out of day two. He was looking pretty good. There was only, I think, a few options left to that I thought who could really hurt him. And unfortunately for Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants, one of those players, Cam Scata, that's my boo, puts a wrench in the plans of Tyrone Tracy to be the Giants' clear lead back this season, Nate.
Yeah, after day two of the draft, I was a little disappointed. There were a couple of running backs where I was hoping that they would get that third round pick. But then Cam Scatterby, right at the start of round four, ends up with the Giants, which felt like a pretty perfect fit for him because the Giants are a team where their offensive line really hasn't been all that great recently. And Scatterby's the kind of running back that can deal with that. He's not the fastest running back, but he can deal with some subpar blocks. We saw this in college. He's the kind of running back that, regardless of what happens, you expect him to get those 4 or 5 yards, even if he has a wide open hole, might not be able to take advantage of it quite as good as some other backs, but he's still going to consistently get first downs, and that's something that we weren't seeing out of the Giants running backs last year. So fully expect him to end up being the starter sooner rather than later. We saw Tyrone Tracy. He played pretty well those first couple starts for the Giants, but after that kind of hit a wall almost immediately. From week 9 on, the lowest rated running backs with at least 75 snaps, Deontay Foreman, Trey Sermon, Jalen Wright, Tracy, and Khalil Herbert. And most of those guys only played in that like 75 to 100 snap range. Tracy was the clear worst running back over the second half of the season out of guys who saw significant playing time. So fully expect Scadaboo to be this lead runner on the team. We've also talked about before, he is more of a receiving back than typically running backs are of his size. So because of that, I think he's capable of being an every down runner for New York. Still not the most ideal situation being on the New York Giants offense, but still being a starter in any offense is a good thing for fantasy.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited about this landing spot for Scadaboo. I get, that he was a day 3 pick, but still better draft capital than even Tyrone Tracy, and Tracy got nearly what 200 carries last season. So I fully expect Scadaboo to take over this lead back role for the Giants, turn into a player that we can all get behind for fantasy. I'm excited for him. Hate it for Tracy, obviously, but I would much rather bet on Cam Scadaboo here. So. Let's talk about not just one player, Nate, but potentially multiple players in the same offense who are going to be battling each other now with all the target competition in the Chicago Bears offense between DJ Moore, Romo Dunze. Then they draft Colston Loveland in the top 10 and go right back to the receiving well with Luther Burden near the top of the second. Ben Johnson is taking no shortcuts and making sure this offense is loaded with weapons for Caleb Williams, which is great for NFL purposes and for Caleb Williams purposes, but it cuts up the pie into smaller pieces here for all these receiving options, at least in 2025, Nate.
Oh, yeah. First off, Cole Kmet, I think, is a very clear number 2 tight end for Chicago now, primarily a run blocking tight end. Thinking more and more about Colston Loveland and his fit there. Like I wrote about in Colston Loveland's pre draft profile of I'm worried about how much snaps he'll see on early downs because of his blocking ability, and listed some tight ends who did see their fantasy value get hurt because of their poor blocking. And the one tight end that was the opposite example of Sam Laporta is someone who is not that good of a blocker, but the coaches didn't care about it and put him on the field as an every down tight end anyway. And more specifically, like he doesn't play in 21 personnel, but does play in 2 tight end sets and 11 personnel, which is just fine for a tight end. TJ Hawkinson does the same thing. That kind of rotation is not an issue for tight end's fantasy value. And so Loveland now ends up with Ben Johnson, who was just fine with Sam Laporta not being the best blocker. So I think, if anything, Loveland might be the player I'm most confident on in this receiving room now. And then thinking about the wide receivers, they added Burden. Definitely fits that slot role, which he played a lot in college. And the other 2 wide receivers for Chicago haven't played much in the slot. But thinking of like DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Luther Burden, and Colston Loveland, likely the 4 receivers on the field on third downs, what's going to be like the pecking order, who's going to get the most targets, who's going to get the least targets. I'm kind of leaning towards Roma Dunze being the one least likely to get targeted in those situations, because if they thought more of a Dunze, they probably would not have spent these 2 draft picks on these 2 receivers. These are both with the new regime coming in. Roma Dunze was part of the old regime. Even TJ Moore was part of the old regime. I'm a bit more confident in Moore because we've seen him perform at a high level for a number of years now, where Dunze, yeah, they spent a top 10 draft pick on him. We saw him do really well in college. Didn't exactly work out in his first year in the NFL. So I think, first off, Cole Kmet's the clear loser from this group, but Roma Dunze might be the second one.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I think it's a good way to look at it. I mean, if we're going to pull out one clear winner, obviously it's Caleb Williams. Like as much as he really has no excuse here as far as being able to develop into year 2. It isn't a guarantee that he overcomes a lot of the flaws that we saw as a rookie. Like so, there's some chance that not just being a crowded room for this receivers, but maybe a poor passing offense again as well. But I think the latter part of that sentence is probably less likely, considering everything the Bears did this offseason to improve the situation around Caleb, including bringing in Ben Johnson as the new head coach, improving the O-line. Like I went from feeling really optimistic about the Colston Loveland landing spot. A little less with Luther Burden also in the mix, but I don't think that means that I'm not betting on Loveland long term. And I think I still have him as like a top 5 pick in rookie drafts for me. Like I think, from a dynasty perspective and potentially even 2025, Loveland is still a high end tight end prospect that I think we should bet on for top 12 fantasy production, even if we have to be patient. I think it can and will work out, especially as some of the older tight ends like Kelsey, Kittle, Mark Andrews, like maybe they start to drop off or retire. But Loveland, I think, will become a lot more desirable in Dynasty over time. I think if you mentioned Romo Dunze as the odd man out here, but even if you just sort these guys like by investment that the Bears have made in them, I know it's a different regime now, but Loveland, he's still a top 3 option in that passing game as a top 10 pick for them. Odunze was also a top 10 pick. DJ Moore, first rounder with a contract extension. Luther Burden may be an odd man out in that he was a second rounder, right? But we'll see how this works out. I tend to agree. I think it's not great for Odunze. I don't think it's great for Burden either, but I still feel optimistic about Colston Loveland most of all. Even though I know just looking at rookie drafts so far, like I've already in 2 of them, Loveland has kind of fallen to the latter part of the first round. People aren't as excited about him, but I still tend to believe that he can get there. People were not optimistic about Brock Bowers last year coming out of the NFL draft as well, right? Because the Raiders had Michael Mayer on the team. They weren't confident in the quarterback situation, but I think we bet on the talent here with Colston Loveland, and I think he can still be worthy of a top 5 pick in rookie drafts.
I would say I agree with Burden that like there were other landing spots where he seemed like he could have been the clear number 2 wide receiver, and this makes it more complicated. So he could be the 4th option, like you said, in the offense, or depending on the running back, could be the 5th option in the offense. But also, I do expect him to play in the slot because I don't see Rome Odunze playing much in the slot. I don't see DJ Moore playing much in the slot. And Ben Johnson's focal point of the passing game was Amon-Ra St. Brown. So that's like, even though I agree this landing spot certainly complicates things for Burden, I also think this opens up a upside for him that he probably would not have seen on some other teams if everything goes right for him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great call. I really like that idea of him working in the Amon-Ra St. Brown role. I think that could make a huge difference in his value. But speaking of smaller slices of pie, like a first round wide receiver here is up next in our loser category. That's Emeka Egbuka, who ends up on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are already strong at the position with a still rolling Mike Evans and an extended Chris Godwin. They also spent a day 2 pick on Jalen McMillan last year, who was probably an even bigger loser in this deal than Egbuka, but still not like an ideal situation for targets in 2025 for this first round wide receiver, Nate.
Yeah, like I was thinking if you were to rank the teams before the draft of which team least needs a wide receiver, the Buccaneers, you could maybe make an argument where number 1, they're at least the top couple. I was looking at like wide receiver grades over the past 3 years and how many teams have 2 really strong wide receivers. I used an 84 receiving grade or better as a threshold, and it's the Buccaneers, it's the Bengals, Dolphins, Eagles, Rams now with Devontae Adams, and Commanders now with Deebo Samuel. And like, you could argue some of those other teams would have been a better landing spot for Egbuka or wide receiver in general because of the age of the receivers, the roles of the receivers, the quarterbacks on those offenses. So the fact that he's going to Tampa Bay that clearly doesn't need a wide receiver, that's concerning. And then just when you consider the wide receivers they do have on the team, Egbuka was known in college as being a slot receiver. He played nearly 3/4 of his routes out of the slot in college. So he's going to a team with Chris Godwin, who is potentially the most prolific slot receiver of the past decade, at least in terms of longevity and doing it over a long period of time. I know we've seen players probably peak higher than Godwin. And then Jalen McMillan, someone who also played in the slot in college, and we were hoping he'd play more in the slot in the NFL, and that hasn't happened. And now is even more likely to not happen with these 3 receivers. So like, even if you consider Mike Evans very well could retire after the season, he's definitely at the age where you expect wide receivers to potentially be retiring. They still have Chris Godwin under contract, a minimum of 2026.
Mm-hmm.
potentially 2027 if they're willing to take on a bunch of dead cap. Jalen McMillan isn't going anywhere on his rookie contract. So you've got three guys who are all better for that slot role or could play the Z receiver role. But we saw Godwin not play as good there. So even if Evans retires, it's not necessarily these are the three wide receivers that are going to be on the field. They might try to find someone else who more specifically plays that X role. Like all three of them are 6'1", all three of them, their measurables are strong. There's so much similarity between the three that, like, yeah, they drafted him very highly. They're going to have a role for him, but is that role going to be big enough that you want to start him in fantasy is the big thing for us. So even though he helps the Buccaneers offense, he is a very good player. Volume's the king in fantasy, and I'm not sure he's going to be getting the volume this year. I'm not even sure he'll be getting the volume next year.
Yeah, it's always difficult to project, right? Like what a team is going to look like a year from now or 2 years from now. But yeah, I agree. Like short term, it doesn't look great for Egbuka's potential for fantasy. Like I think the most optimistic path here is that Chris Godwin isn't fully healthy to start the year, starts out on the pup or something like that, and it opens up a spot for Egbuka to emerge as the second wide receiver. Plus, Mike Evans, 32 years old, so he might see a decline at some point too. But I'm with you. Like I think if like we're for Godwin, obviously signing the 3-year deal, this free agency period, like that does hurt kind of the long term optimism. But there is that post June 1st out in Godwin's contract as soon as next offseason. Then again, you consider maybe Evans is set to drop off in any of the next 2 seasons here, most likely. Like I could find ways to like the long term potential here for Egbuka. It's just none of it is a guarantee to happen, right? Like Godwin could very well stay on the team. Mike Evans could still operate as the top wide receiver that he's been and look like last year as well. So I'm still interested in him for Dynasty Egbuka, but definitely not one of my favorite landing spots. So I definitely getting him on the list of fallers or losers for coming out of this draft for sure.
Just to add to the little bit of yeah, maybe this could work out this year. They do have a brand new offensive coordinator, Josh Grizzard, a young offensive coordinator, has mostly been a quality control coach during his time in the NFL. So we really don't have a great sense of how his offense is going to look, even though we know Chris Godwin's a great receiver. We know Mike Evans is a great receiver. Maybe he views the wide receivers differently than how coaches have in the past. Like we expect it to look very similar to Liam Cohen's offense last year because Cohen's offense had so much success, but maybe they do change things up significantly compared to what we've seen because it's a new guy.
Yep, entirely possible here. So yeah, I think I still have him. I think end of the first round in rookie drafts. I know not everybody's going to love that, but I think that's about the right spot for him. He's a first round wide receiver, still a talented player. I think that situation can improve for him quickly beyond this season. So there's potential there, but. To close it out, Nate, we got some few quick hitters
I
or
do have
honorable mentions.
one
Oh,
other
go for it.
guy,
Go.
TreVeyon Henderson, which I don't know if you were trying to silence me on
Oh no,
Henderson or
no,
you
no.
just skipped over him
I
earlier.
skipped over him, so I'm sorry. Please tell
All
us
good.
about TreVeyon Henderson. Go ahead.
So yeah, Henderson, Harris is probably the biggest loser because he goes from a potential feature back to a complete backup. But I think Henderson might be pretty close to the next biggest loser in terms of his landing spot. Like he could have gone to the Bears one pick later. The Broncos were another team. Like if Henderson ended up there instead of Harvey, that would have been huge for him. But I both really like Henderson as a player. We've talked about him before the draft of how much we liked his receiving and how high we had him among running backs. But for me, a lot of this has to do with Josh McDaniels and how Josh McDaniels has deployed his running backs for the past 2 decades. We've seen this with several teams, with the Raiders, the Patriots, and Broncos. He's used either 2-back committees or 3-back committees throughout 18 years as either a head coach or an offensive coordinator, where he was the offensive coordinator with a defensive head coach. In those 18 years, and 17 of them, the person who leads the team in carries is different than the running back who leads the team in snaps on third down. So he's always had a third down back, and he's always had a rushing back. The one exception was the one year he was the Rams offensive coordinator, and they had Steven Jackson, a three-time Pro Bowl running back who was very established every down back. So that's been the one exception where he did have an every down player, but we've seen this with the Patriots. Even the last year he was with the Patriots, we saw Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris kind of split that early down role, and then it was Brandon Bolden play on third down. And Henderson, like last year, he was a third down back for Ohio State. He maxed out at around 65% snap rate in college, but he was less than that his final year in college. So I could very well see this being a 2 or 3 back committee with the Patriots. I know Ramondre Stevenson, we view him as having a down year last year. Part of that was the offensive line, part of that was 7 fumbles. We know they've done a lot of things to the offensive line, including adding Will Campbell, 4th overall, and fumbles are not a predictive thing. They don't transfer from one year to the next like a lot of other stats do. Like, it's a very, very low correlation from one year to the next, and 4 of those 7 fumbles occurred in the first 4 weeks of the season. At the 3 first years of his career, everything past that, he hasn't had a fumbling problem just early on last season. So I don't see those fumbles continuing to be a problem for Stevenson. And while I wouldn't have him as like a top 10 running back in the NFL, I think he is still one of the top 32 or so early down backs. I don't see him playing much on third downs anymore with Henderson there, but I still see Stevenson being a big part of this offense. Antonio Gibson, similarly, like not one of the top 10 or 15 running backs in the NFL, but probably one of the best number 3 running backs that exist in the NFL right now. So I could see this being a case where Gibson gets sprinkled in a little bit. Henderson's playing a lot on third downs. We've seen Josh McDaniels, especially when like James White was on the team, be one of the teams that targets running backs more than most other teams. So I still see Henderson getting a lot of targets, but I don't see him getting a ton of carries in this offense with these other running backs on the field. Like, White averaged 3.4 rushing attempts per game throughout his NFL career. Only had 2 seasons where he was above 4, and that was 5.9 carries per game, 4.5 carries per game. And yeah, White had some fantasy relevancy, but that was with Tom Brady, with Rob Gronkowski, with Julian Edelman on Super Bowl winning teams. This Patriots team is not quite that. So I don't see this as a great landing spot for Henderson. I'm not sure he's going to be someone that you can put in fantasy starting lineups this year. Still have him decently well in my dynasty rankings just because I don't know how long Josh McDaniels will be the offensive coordinator. It's also a possibility that Henderson's the exception and he goes against 2 decades of running back usage and treats Henderson differently, but that's where I have Henderson.
Yeah, no, I get it for sure. And the same thing with like Ramondre Stevenson. Like I think he could be categorized as kind of a loser here too, just because like adding a second round running back into the mix here, like as much as Ramondre Stevenson's probably still going to get that early down work, like I think Henderson still gets some just based on the investment in him. And you know, Ramondre Stevenson, he signed an extension. What was it, last offseason? I guess it was, right? Something like
That
that.
sounds right, yeah.
Yeah, so but that was also the past coaching regime as well,
Right.
right? So there's different, I guess, maybe faith in which running back is going to be their lead back of the future here. So I'm with you. I don't love TreVeyon Henderson for 2025, but I don't doubt that he can potentially be that lead back beyond this season as well. So I see a lot of already rookie drafts where he's going within the top 5 picks. I don't know that I'm quite there yet, but I don't think I'm too far off of it either. So I still like the option of TreVeyon Henderson for long term. But yeah, 2025 wise, it's hard to kind of view how this running back crew is going to end up with being reliable for us for fantasy, I guess.
Yeah. And like, even though Stevenson's extension was with the past regime, Stevenson has played in Josh McDaniels' offense
Yeah.
and has played well in a limited role. So not good for fantasy purposes,
Mhm.
but it was a 3 running back committee, which is what we could be with this
Yeah,
year.
that's true. Yep, very true. So okay, so now let's get to the honorable mentions. I'm sorry that I skipped ahead there, Nate. Who were some
Okay.
of the honorable mention guys that you had on the loser list here?
I mean, Shadur Sanders is on the list. You've heard enough about him literally everywhere else, so I'm not going to continue on that. Jonathan Brooks is another one. Like, we know he has the ACL tear. We know he's going to be out for a lot this season. The fact that they added Rico Dowdle in free agency, it was fine. It was a 1-year contract. It seemed like a 1-year player for while they wait for Brooks to recover, but then they added ETN in the draft. So ETN's going to be on the roster for a while. So Brooks could be like the number 4 running back by the time he's healthy. Next year, he could be the number 3 running back, but they got running backs under contract for a number of years. So who knows where Brooks will end up. And then Christian Kirk, another one. We talked about the Texans wide receivers. They added 2 rookies in the draft. So that makes it a lot harder to trust Kirk as a number 2 wide receiver in Houston.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. And then, yeah, the only other one like I was thinking about was like Jaylen Warren for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and only because like as day 2 went on, like I started to get more and more excited about the potential of Jaylen Warren taking over a larger role for the Steelers. And he was so close to making it out of day 2 without competition, but then the team drafted Caleb Johnson, so I think they do kind of go back to a little bit more of that shared workload, which we've been seeing in past years. But that was starting to get he was starting to get a little bit more on my radar was Warren, and almost got there, but they did end up going running back on day 2. But yeah, that is going to do it for us today. We'll have much more rookie content and discussions to cover in the next few weeks. So we'll take a break there. But before we're back again later in the week to discuss rookie rankings as well. So thank you all for tuning in. If you're on the YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us a ton, and I'd greatly appreciate it. Nate, thank you as always for doing this. But please let the people know what you have going on at pff.com this week.
Sure. So first off, I made sure to get the rookie rankings up Sunday morning for anyone who's already been having the rookie drafts. So both in Superflex and single quarterback leagues. Today had rookie rankings, or not rookie rankings, dynasty rankings in general go up. So I think the top 325 or so players, if you're doing a dynasty redraft right now. Also starting to hammer the player profiles. I did a bunch of them before the draft. Now I'm doing them again after the draft, taking into account the landing spot, teammates, coaches, all that stuff to get as complete of a picture on each player as I can. So I'll be having 5 of those up per day over the course of this week. I'll still have a couple more this weekend. So we'll have the top 30 to 35 or so rookies done by the end of the weekend. And then starting next week, I'll start getting back into some of the veteran players, doing player profiles basically throughout May and June. So by the time July hits, I'll have the top 200 or so players covered for the season.
Nice, love that. As for me, I recorded a YouTube exclusive video breaking down my offense plus IDP rookie rankings, which is out now. So if you're an audio only listener and in an IDP league, be sure to come on down to the YouTube, like and subscribe, check that out. I'll also have a full IDP rookie rankings article out on Tuesday morning. Offense plus IDP rookie rankings article on Wednesday, Superflex and 1QB rookie rankings out on Thursday, IDP winners and losers article on Friday, plus back in the podcast feed talking rookie linebackers this week, and with Nate talking rookie rankings in general. So very busy, lots to look forward to, but until next time, peace out.